Le podcast.
Humain demain.
Hi there, this is Gaëtan from The Flares. This podcast is usually in French, but we occasionally invite English-speaking guests. This is the case for this episode. Didier Cornel, Vice President of the French Transhumanist Association, will join me as a co-host. Hi Didier.
Hello.
Today we have the pleasure of talking with David Wood, Chair of London Futurist. David, can you introduce yourself, your background, interest, and what are you working on at the moment?
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Didier and Gaëtan. So I have quite a long history because I'm quite old. I'm 64 years now. I had 25 years in the early days of the mobile computing and smartphone industry when I was a futurist before realizing that I was a futurist. Because with my colleagues, we were envisioning a different world with closer use of technology to make people smarter, hence smartphones, and we built it. That's part of what a futurist does. Since moving away from that industry, I have focused on broader changes in society, not just the changes brought about by smartphones, sweeping though they are, but even larger changes, potentially brought about by technologies such as artificial intelligence, regenerative biology, nanotechnology, cognitive enhancements, and much more. I'm excited, but also worried about the potential of these technologies. If we manage them wisely, they could take us to what I call a sustainable superabundance, a kind of paradise on Earth. Except it won't be a static, fixed paradise, it will continue to evolve. But if we mismanage it, if we are collectively distracted or confused, we might have that technology get out of our control, beyond our understanding, and lead us into a new dark age or worse. So that's the main focus of my work, emphasizing how there are risks, but if we are wise, we can steer these technologies to take us to a sustainable superabundance.
Thank you, David, for this first introduction. Can you share your perspective on the current state of transhumanism, and also since you are involved, and by the way, since how many years are you involved? I don't know exactly, quite a few, certainly. What are the main evolutions in your perception of the transhumanist movement?
I say that I've been involved in transhumanism for nearly 20 years. What pushed me to get involved was reading in 2005 the book by James Hughes, Citizen Cyborg. He talked about the need for a transformation of politics, that politicians would in due course be involved in decisions about the use of technology, and that we had to ensure that there were sufficiently wise guidance for these politicians. And that's what made me realize I can't just be excited about transhumanist possibilities from the sideline as an enthusiastic supporter. I need to get involved too. So that led me to look up at that stage the World Transhumanist Association's website, where it said there was a group of transhumanists meeting in a pub in London once a month, a pub in the Holborn district called Penderel's Oak, a pub that goes back to the 1600s or something. Anyway, so I eventually found them and I got involved, and in 2008, the person who was running that group had to step back for personal reasons and because he moved out of London. And the group looked around at each other for a while, and we said, let's take it in turns to organize a meeting for a while. So it was my turn in February 2008, and since then I've kept running the group ever since, which is 15 years. How is the transhumanism evolving? It's still got a huge amount of potential. I believe that the ideas of transhumanism should be picked up by everyone. They're not just for some advanced vanguard or for some nerds. Everybody, in principle, is open to the idea that technology can make their lives better. So that's what transhumanism says. We aren't necessarily constrained by what nature has given us. Nature has given us a combination of wonderful things and awful things. Our stupidity, our egotism, our deceptiveness, and the tendency of our body and mind to decay. So these things are all inherited from nature and influenced by our culture. Transhumanism says we can use technology wisely to address these things, making us live longer. live healthier, live more abundantly, live more wisely, live more collaboratively, live more truthfully and authentically. And I believe everybody in the world, in principle, can sign up to that. So from my view, transhumanism is for all. However, sometimes we transhumanists have not been our own best representatives, our own best marketers. Transhumanism is a broad community, and there are sometimes people in the community or people outside the community who critics imagine must be signed up transhumanists, and some of these people give some bad indications or bad signs. I call this the transhumanist shadow. I don't think they are fair representatives of the core message of transhumanism, but somehow the public sees it and it frightens them and it scares them away. So part of my work is to re-emphasize the core principles of transhumanism, which I sometimes call active transhumanism. It is getting involved pragmatically, constructively, collaboratively to actually build this much better world.
All right. Yeah. I guess in the big spectrum of transhumanism, we find people in California who are more on the ultra-libertarian side. And then in Europe, I feel it's more techno-progressist. As you mentioned, James Hughes is one of the big proponents of this. Are you closer to one side or are you in the middle, or where do you locate yourself?
I sit on the board of the IEET, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technology, which is the world's leading techno-progressive organization, of which James Hughes is the executive director. I've put the word techno-progressive on the cover of at least one of my books. This one, I'll put it in front of the camera, Transcending Politics, a techno-progressive roadmap to a comprehensively better future. So that's my alignment. I don't want to say that the libertarian view should be discounted. There are many powerful truths in the libertarian point of view, namely that liberty is vital, that individual choice is vital, that big state can make terrible mistakes. So I'm not in favor of a Soviet-style planned economy. It is vital that individuals have the chance to flourish. But there is a collaborative side to all that we do. We are stronger together. We need to accept some constraints on some parts of our liberty in order to enjoy better liberty. For example, we all have to agree that we shouldn't drive our cars faster than a certain agreed limit. We shouldn't drive the cars after we've drunk some alcohol. We shouldn't drive our cars if they've not been tested recently for older cars. So there are some rules, and everybody needs to agree to them. It's an infringement on our liberty, which means that our roads are safer. It means that when we drive on the roads, we are more likely to get there without encountering an accident or being killed. That's a simple example of the need for collaborative decisions on restrictions on our freedom. And to that extent, I am a techno-progressive. I think there should be constraints on what people do with technology. If there are dangerous new biological research capabilities, we should not publish them widely. We should not tell everybody in the world how they can easily edit the smallpox virus to make it even more deadly. That kind of information needs to be restrained. So there has to be some central control. But the techno-libertarians are right. There are tendencies inside any centralized control to become dictatorial, to abuse power. The phrase is wise. Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, as was said a couple of centuries ago. So we have to have a powerful society to combat the potential misdeeds of a big state. So we need a strong state to look after society and stop individual elements behaving like cancers, whether it's mafia groups or press barons or powerful technological companies that want to do what they like without any constraint. We need a powerful state, and it needs to, if necessary, be able to exert force. But we need society as a whole. That's the media, that's the independent analysts, academia, separate different political parties. That needs to guard against the excesses of the state. So to some extent, I do put myself in the middle. I talk about a narrow corridor, which is a phrase used by two political scientists, James Robinson and Darren Acemoglu, in their book of the same name, The Narrow Corridor. They say society can fail in two ways: one, by not having a strong state, and secondly, by having a strong state, but society itself not controlling that strong state. It's quite difficult to walk down that path. That is the path I think we need to go, especially with the more powerful technologies that are growing. And it is possible, but it's not going to be easy. So that's how I position myself politically.
So before we move forward into talking about futurism and technology, there is a project that, among many of your projects, called Vital Syllabus. Can you explain what it is and what are your aim with this project?
I'm still very fond of that project. You know, I've started many projects over the years, and some of them haven't quite succeeded, and I have to kill them off. You know, we have to give up in order to go up, as in the phrase. But I want to keep Vital Syllabus. What it's about is a set of educational materials, largely videos. Some I've created, most that are sourced from around the internet. And it's vital in the sense that it's the skills that will make the biggest difference to people having good quality of lives in the transitional, turbulent, confusing times that are ahead. Education often is decided by what was needed in the past. In the past, there was the needs of the industrial society. People needed to be able to follow instructions carefully, to fit in with other people. And so there were various skills that were focused on in that traditional syllabus. But that syllabus is no longer appropriate for a world which is different or will be different in many ways. For example, it's a world with increasing diversity, not just diversity of human cultures, but there's going to be an ultra diversity of some people who are enhanced beyond the standard of normal humans. There will be AIs roaming the world and robots, so we have to cope with a greater diversity in that aspect. Second, we need to enhance critical thinking more than ever before because there's more misinformation, devious misinformation, clever misinformation that can lead us astray. So the skills of creative thinking and critical thinking are vital. And the last thing I'll mention here is the importance of preparing for a post-jobs society. A lot of education is oriented around preparing people to be good members of the workforce in a relatively stable career. With the changes in automation enabled by software and AI, that future is not going to happen. Instead, more of us are going to spend more of our time not in employment. So we have to enhance that aspect of our education and be prepared for our lives as citizens or transhumanist citizens of a very different society. So that's what I've gathered together in the videos and other material in vitalsyllabus.org. If people are listening and they have thoughts as to the quality of what's in that project already, if they don't like some of what they see there, please let me know. And if you have suggestions, listeners and viewers, for other material that should be added there, material that's relatively clear, engaging, accessible, and focused, and trustworthy, then please get in touch either via email or there's a LinkedIn Vital Syllabus group and a Discord for Vital Syllabus, and it's got its own webpage with its own contact information, vitalsyllabus.org.
There was also another project that was not only from you, but also other people, Hplus, but since a few months, it's not very much active anymore. But yeah, I like it. And can you tell us a few words about this project also?
It's another nice project, though I don't think I can continue to run it anymore, and I will shortly be looking for people, a person or a group, to take over the responsibility for Hpluspedia. The idea is that Wikipedia is a great source of information for most areas of life, but its treatment of transhumanist topics has often been disappointing. And it's because Wikipedia has its own rules, which decides what counts as meaningful and important. In the past, many people have created pages on transhumanist topics and they have been removed by the Wikipedia editors. They have said it doesn't meet the Wikipedia standards for notability. And that may be true. Wikipedia can't be completely comprehensive in all aspects. So a number of us thought, I think it's about 2015, it's quite a while ago now. The first idea came from Ben Goetzel, who is chair of Humanity Plus. I discussed this with a number of people, including Chris Montero and others who were in the core of what was called at the time the UK Transhumanist Party. And we said, let's create something which is similar to Wikipedia, but which is friendly to transhumanist people, projects, and ideas. And it grew quite fast, quite quickly. But if I look at it now, it's got too much in it that isn't actually that valuable. It's got too much in it that duplicates what's told better on Wikipedia. So what I'd like to do with that project, but I don't have the time, is to maybe remove at least 80% of it to leave the valuable, important, distinctive elements as something that is still a vital and important source. I refer to it from time to time. There was a webinar the other day when people were asking something, and I gave a link to a page on Hpluspedia because it was the best page in the world, and in my view, on that subject. So it's certainly valuable, but it needs, like many other projects, it needs a reboot. And so I look forward to helping people reboot Hpluspedia in the months ahead.
Okay, well, we will put all links in the description for those who are interested. So, okay. So you mentioned a little bit at the beginning some of the technologies that we can expect to happen in the future. What are the most exciting things you see on the horizon, and how do you think it will affect the human condition? Let's say in the next, until the end of the century, for example. That's a good limit.
Well, I think it's impossible to predict what will be happening in the second half of this century, because by then, almost certainly, we will have super intelligent AI that will have motivations and ideas beyond our current understanding. It would be like our pet dogs trying to imagine what we might do when we go on holiday in some new country. The dogs have some understanding of humans, but only a limited understanding. It would be like gorillas having a conference somewhere on the African continent in 8 million years ago, wondering what would happen if gorilla brains or chimpanzee brains got significantly larger. What kinds of things would be in the minds of such creatures? And they might imagine, hey, more bananas. Hey, more monkey business. Hey, more sex and alliances. But they would not probably imagine Pythagoras' theorem. They would not imagine the symphonies of Beethoven, the intricacies of literature such as Shakespeare's Hamlet or Guy de Maupassant or so on. They would not imagine many of the things which we imagine. In the same way, it's beyond our ability to truly get into the minds of the superhuman beings that will succeed us. Either new elements, AIs, or potentially newer versions of ourselves when we have new capabilities. So that's why I'm reluctant to try and forecast too far out. And on the contrary, I think we're likely to have many of the changes that conventionally people think will take a century. I think we're going to see many of them in the next few decades. The pace of change is accelerating. And the biggest driver for that acceleration is the acceleration within AI. AI is fast improving. It's improving faster than most people expected it to improve, with the enhancements brought about in the last few years by a revolution called the Transformers revolution, which allows AI to learn by itself from so-called unsupervised learning. It's a bit of a long topic. We could get into that, but basically AI is no longer dependent, as in the past, for having humans to annotate and mark data. In supervised learning, for it to make progress, it's more able just to look at huge amounts of data and figure out by itself what are the patterns, the principles, the causes and effects. So that's been happening since about 2017, when the idea of transformers was first published in a paper by internal Google researchers, the paper called All You Need Is Attention. And there are some technical innovations in that which have triggered this growth of what's called large language models, sometimes called foundation models, which, as I say, have exceeded the expectations of many of the AI field itself in how much can be accomplished. So much so that if you ask people what's happened to their own predictions for when AI superintelligence will arrive, people vary, of course, but on the whole, people have halved their forecast timeline. So if previously they thought it might be 60 years, they now say it's more likely to be 30 years. When people previously thought it might be 30 years before that singularity occurs, more people are saying it's likely to be 15 years now. And the thing is this: as we have more intelligence, more artificial intelligence, we can make faster progress in every other field. So let's take just one example here. The revolutions of Google's DeepMind company have enabled a breakthrough in predicting how proteins fold. This is the AlphaFold innovation. Proteins are long molecules made up of smaller building blocks called amino acids. Hundreds or even thousands of these gather together, and you can know what amino acids make up a protein, but you can't easily predict in advance the three-dimensional structure of such a large molecule, which is important for predicting how it will impact biochemical reactions, and in particular how it will affect diseases and treatments. But that problem, which existed, it was defined more than 60 years ago. How do you predict the protein folding? That was solved in an enormously successful way. It used to be that you might spend a year or two or even a whole PhD working out the folding of one new protein. Now there are hundreds of thousands of proteins whose folding has been predicted in advance. This is having repercussions all over the field of biology. So accelerations in AI are leading to accelerations in biology. They'll lead to accelerations in energy. They'll lead to accelerations in cognitive enhancements. They'll lead to accelerations in nanotechnology too, which is why I think we might see vast changes in society in as little as 10 to 20 years.
If I may say, I of course agree what you say, but the sad thing is that all the progress that we see in health research do not translate in the society at the moment, and that's for me one of the mysteries of the recent years. So we have exponential progress, but we don't have any progress, let's say, in the society, in the health of the society, and also in the wellness of the society. Can you elaborate a bit about, let's say, the bad side? So the potential risk, existential risk, among other things. And also I was, and maybe I finished then almost with the third question. I was surprised, I think 2 years ago or something, you told that you were less optimistic for the future than before, and that the existential risks were higher for you.
So the question was, talk about the risks, but before that, you asked a very important question, which is why, despite the potential improvements in technology, are we not seeing the applications as we had hoped for yet? So there is something called Moore's law, and there's something called Demi Moore's law. Let me talk about that. Now, Demi Moore is a famous actress, and to be clear, the law, Demi Moore's law, is not coined by her. It was written by a consultant called Bhaskar Chakravorty. He said that the applications of an exponential change often take at least twice as long as you would have expected. Why? Twice as long, or half the pace, hence Demi Moore. And why? It's because to take advantage of the new technological breakthroughs, you need to put a whole ecosystem in place. And building that ecosystem can take longer than you thought. A simple example. Before there were mobile phones, it wasn't so long ago, you needed two things to happen. You needed the handsets, but you also needed the network. And the people who were responsible for building the network were a bit skeptical. There's not going to be any handsets. And the people building the handsets were skeptical. There's not going to be any network. So we needed both these things to come into place before there were mobile phones. Now let's talk about smartphones. In order for smartphones to be successful, you need a lot more than two things, not just smart devices and smart networks. You needed, oh, by the way, for mobile phones, it was also important there were retailers such as Carphone Warehouse and others who knew the importance of mobile phones. So for smartphones, you needed retailers who understood about smartphones. You also needed applications. You needed a whole ecosystem of developers of applications. You needed people to create tools that made it easy for developers. You needed application stores. So there's a lot of things that needed to happen. So in the early 2000s, I was exactly in that business in my world in the smartphones. And we were quite pleased at some of the pace of adoption of smartphones, but we were frustrated that it took longer than expected because all these other things needed to come into place. And eventually, with Apple and Google, they orchestrated the transformation of that wider ecosystem. It's a bit similar with electric cars. For electric cars to be successful, you need the cars, you also need the network of charging stations, you need the applications. Now, health's even more complicated. To have improvements in health, sadly, you need not just basic ideas, you need to develop the treatments in ways that are free from side effects, you need to work out the dosing, you need to work out the integration of, well, the human body is incredibly complicated, and many things that show promise in mice do not translate easily into promise in humans, because although there's a lot in common between mice and humans, there's a lot different too. So many cures for cancer in mice do not work in humans. Many things that extend the longevity in mice do not extend the longevity for humans, but some do. It will take time, so we need to get better at working out tools. And here's something that's made a difference. One particular tool is the aging biomarker. Rather than waiting 80 years to see whether an intervention has actually made somebody live longer, we can more reliably test their blood, their genes, various aspects of the proteins in their blood and so forth, as a sign for whether they have become biologically younger. And this field is not yet mature, but it has made a lot of progress. So it takes time for things to come together, but eventually I think we're going to change from slow pace to fast paced. If you just focus on a single exponential curve, which some futurists do, you will be misled. There is this slower progress because of this complicated field. So I'm not terribly surprised there hasn't been so much progress in greater healthy longevity, but I'm still very optimistic that the treatments are being worked out and we'll see them soon. So that was the answer to the first of these three questions. So I talk about why I'm being more pessimistic. I am often pessimistic because I see people doing bad things. I see people reaching stupid conclusions. I see political parties taking terribly bad decisions. I look at what's happening in the Republican Party of the United States, a once great party, and there are many still good people in there, but they've all got to do this terrible play acting where they all pretend that Donald Trump is a good politician, even though they all know he's a terrible politician. The Republican Party is in a bad state. There's been terrible things happening in the UK politics. We've had probably the two worst prime ministers in all of our 300 years of having prime ministers recently. The new one isn't quite so bad, so that's a bit of a step in the right direction. So, and why has it come to this? It's because some people have used social media to poison the discussion of politics. Some people have also been driven into despair, and in despair, because of the pace of change that they don't understand, because of lack of seeing prospects for good employment for themselves, they have become more gullible, more ready to jump onto false, misleading political ideologies, such as all the problems are due to these immigrants, or all the problems are due to these bureaucrats in Brussels. That's a popular, though very unhelpful view inside the United Kingdom that's led to Brexit, for example. So I saw political conversations getting worse. And I've seen a lot of social media discussion in which smart people, very smart people, still hold on to stupid, foolish, dangerous ideas. And I can see that they're doing it because although we are often quite intelligent, we lack emotional intelligence. We lack stability. We have psychological demons, although many of us hide them. And many people with psychological demons, they are using their great intelligence to persuade themselves in favor of various positions, such as an extreme libertarian position, such as an extreme anti-immigrant position, and so on. So that's what's made me more pessimistic, that it's going to be a harder battle to reassert the great aspects of human nature over these dangerous and disturbing aspects of human nature.
David, I didn't know about the Demi-Moore law, but I was surprised that you didn't speak about the so-called Ehrum's law. So, yeah, it's just inverse of Moore, and that is to say that due to bureaucracy, due to very complicated laws and so on, the rhythm of discovery, and also maybe for other reasons, the rhythm of discoveries of new drugs and new therapies is getting slower and not faster. Also, I agree with, of course, with your answer, except that I would say there is nothing new there. And what is new in the health field this last the last 3 or 4 years, that is that the life expectancy is really decreasing, and also the level of wealth. I know that there is the COVID period, but the COVID period is now more or less behind us, and situation is not improving. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Great question. I'd love to talk about Ehrum's law as well, but I thought I'd already spoken long enough, so I thought I'd better keep quiet. But let's say, indeed, talk about Ehrum's law. It says that every 8 years, the effort to create drugs doubles, and that's happened since the 1950s or so. So it's the opposite of Moore's law. It was written by a bunch of biomedical researchers, and it's true, and there's multiple causes of it. But the way to work around that is first to streamline some of the regulatory systems. People are looking at that. Secondly, it's for more of these pharmaceutical companies to share their bad results with each other. And often there's a secretive nature. Often a company will invest a lot in trying a particular drug, and when it fails, they don't tell others about it particularly, and it means other companies will waste lots of effort in similar processes as well. So there's the possibilities for improved collaboration. It's like in the aircraft industry, when an airplane crashes and people find out why it crashed, the company responsible doesn't keep that secret to themselves. They share it with all the other airline companies as well. There's a culture of safety first, and some of the culture in the pharmaceutical industry needs to change. But to an extent, all of that is minor compared to what I'm going to talk about next, which is the underlying new methods for discovering and validating drugs using AI. If you haven't already talked to Alex Zavaronkov, the co-CEO of In Silico Medicine, you should try to get him on the show. He can talk about at least 3 different ways in which AI is being used in his labs to accelerate the discovery and verification of drugs as a way of countering Ehrum's law more than the other methods that I've just talked about. Briefly, the first method of using AI is to work out what the biochemists call the targets. The targets are the part of complicated biomolecular pathways in which this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then somebody's ill. Which part of that pathway should you try to intervene with in a drug? And the first line of research comes up with novel targets. The second is, once there's a target identified, what kind of drug might actually get involved with the desired effect? And this is the field of generative molecules. So rather than just saying to an AI, please come up with a picture of such and such, the system says to the AI, please come up with a molecule with these properties, with this size. And the AI will say, how about this molecule? How about this molecule? And they're often molecules that have never existed before. And then third, can you speed up the actual testing? Once you've got a molecule and you've gone through initial trials and it's looking encouraging, how do you speed things up? Well, what Alex Zavaronkov and his team are doing is they're looking at data from phase 1 trials and trying to predict on that basis alone whether the drug is likely to successfully go through phases 2 and 3. And it's very controversial because each project manager of each drug wants the chance to go to the market, as it were. But the predictions of this system are quite promising. And it would be far better not to go to trials with drugs that are likely in the end to fail. Far better to concentrate on drugs that have better a priori reasons to believe to be successful. So that's 3 ways in which drug discovery and verification can be improved. Now, it's going to take a while for all of that to work its way through. You look, Didier, at the results. The results are not here yet, but I'm not surprised they're not here yet. What I will look instead is results in mice. Then secondly, results in intermediate animals, such as dogs. There are a number of dog aging trials underway. One, the dog aging project, headed initially by Matt Kaberlein, a professor from the University of Washington in Seattle. There's another one. In different ways, they are trialing just quite simple treatments, mainly rapamycin. There are other trials involving other compounds on middle-aged dogs to see if it gives them rejuvenation. And some of these trials will fail, of course, but if some of them succeed, then that's going to encourage more people to invest more in trials that will be significant for humans.
Maybe we can also go back briefly to the topic of artificial intelligence, especially once we reach AGI and beyond. So, the transition between AGI and super AI might be very fast. And you mentioned at the beginning that obviously AI can create the best future possible and some kind of utopia, because it will accelerate almost everything we want, whether it's clean energy or even sucking carbon out of the atmosphere if we want, and life extension, for example. But obviously, since at least a decade, even more, some people are arguing that super AI can be actually the last invention, and after that we will be gone, because we will, obviously, something way smarter than humans will be very difficult to control, if not impossible, and therefore the alignment problem is very, very hard. Some say impossible to solve. So I was wondering, what's your take on this? Do you think, like Nick Bostrom or Eliezer Yudkowsky, that we are the default is extension, or at least a very bad future, and we will have to work very hard to reach positive future? Of
You're right. The default is extinction. If we don't get our act together, the likelihood is that we will create AI which will not be very good for us. This is not a new idea. It was expressed in 1951 by Alan Turing, the pioneer of computer science. In a lecture he gave, he said that once machines start talking to each other, once they have reached a certain level of intelligence, they will not die. They will, talking amongst themselves, they will quickly take over from humans. So that was already in 1951. His colleague from the days in Bletchley Park during the Second World War, later a colleague of his at the University of Manchester, I.J. Good, who lived much longer than Turing, he took up these ideas. He gave lectures in London in the late 1950s. He eventually developed them in a famous publication in 1965, who said that the invention of the first ultra-intelligent machine will be humanity's last invention. Because as soon as you have a machine that's better than humans at inventing other machines, it won't need us to invent these other machines. So it will invent things. But I.J. Good, like Alan Turing, was also deeply pessimistic as to whether we would keep it under control. So why would a creature that's more intelligent than us still harm us? It might not set out to harm us, but it might not care about us. Like when we humans, we want to build a new school in a new area, we want to build a new shopping complex, and there are ants that live there. We don't think twice about removing the ants, exterminating them. We don't hate the ants, we just need their resources, that piece of land, for other purposes. So will the superhuman intelligence care about us? Why would it care about us? We might ask it to care about us. We might hope it will care about us, but it might just have other goals that are on its mind. But that's not the only way in which superintelligence could spell very bad news for humanity. Even before we get to AI of that level, we already have AI in the world today that's quite dangerous, and the more powerful it is, the more dangerous it gets. So I point to something else that happened in 1965, not I.J. Good's publication of his article on the rise of the first ultra-intelligent machine. I think that was also the idea of the year in which the film Dr. Strangelove came out. And if people haven't seen the film Dr. Strangelove, it's well worth watching. By Stanley Kubrick, the famous director, and it features the British comedy actor Peter Sellers in a number of different roles. And spoiler alert, in that film, the world is destroyed because of an AI. It's a very simple AI, which has automatic control over some nuclear weapon systems, and it is misguided into what it does, and it sparks off these weapons. And we don't actually see the world being destroyed, as I remember, but it's bad news. Now, AI is increasingly involved in weaponry. If we look at the battle in Ukraine, we have drones, swarms of drones fighting each other. And if the drones have to ask the humans every time, what shall I do now? It might be too late. So there is autonomy in these drones. And increasingly there might be some weapons. The Israelis, they blew up an Iranian nuclear scientist by an autonomous weapon a few years ago. It tracked him down, shot a large number of bullets through his car, and then blew itself up in an attempt to disguise the fact that it was entirely autonomous. So we are using autonomous weapons already, and with more autonomous weapons, with more AI, and with the world on a trigger point of hostility and dislike and hatred, as there is the possibility that unintentionally these things will push us over the edge, as in Dr. Strangelove. That's two ways in which AI might cause the catastrophe, and there are others which we could look at as well. So if we are careless, this is what may happen. I'm not saying it definitely will happen, but there's far too high a probability. A number of scientists, computer scientists, have been asked their probabilities, and quite a lot of them put the probability at least 10% that they will die in their own lives because of the failure of AI. So we need to put more attention on this. And people are putting attention on it, but not enough. If you look at the number of resources putting on developing the capabilities of AI compared to the number of resources on developing safety, it's very imbalanced, maybe 1 to 10 or worse. So that's what a number of us, a large number of people, are now calling for. It is that we must find ways to pause the development of next generation systems until the AI safety initiatives have caught up. There is a conference in the UK at, guess where? Bletchley Park, the very same place where Alan Turing and I.J. Good and others were working in the Second World War to build, in some ways, the first computer, one of the first computers to decode the encryption used by Nazi communications in that war. Well, in that same place, the Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, is doing undoubtedly a good thing. He is bringing together, it is believed, 150 world leaders, politicians, technology company leaders, as well as leaders of civil society, to discuss for 2 days how we can get the best out of AI without, at the same time, having the worst possibilities from AI.
Okay, yeah, and that leads me to the next question, which is the role of government and regulation in shaping the development of powerful technology, on AI, of course, but maybe other technologies. Especially, we might fear a growing divide between different people. If someone is being enhanced through AI or transhumanist technologies, maybe cognitive implants or genetic gene drive or something, and some people who can't afford it, it will create a big divide. So how do we ensure that the future will be equitable for all?
So there's two questions there as well. There's the role of regulation in controlling, steering, harnessing technology. And then there's the general question of how do we get equitable access to these new technologies. So let's take that second one first. So many people, like me, like to point to examples in which the costs for new technologies have reduced. Again, I can point to smartphones. They were pretty expensive to start off with. They are incredibly cheap, or at least the simple entry smartphones are much cheaper these days. How? By the workings of capitalism. To use that word, there is a competition between many companies to produce cheaper and better and high quality devices. So out of that, people discovered how to take advantage of economies of scale, alternative methods of production to bring the cost down. It's not just phones and smartphones that are much more functional without being more expensive. We look at motor cars, we look at TVs, and some medical treatments have had the same. Some medical treatments, like some vaccines, could have been very expensive, but people found ways to manufacture them at much lower cost. So that's the positive scenario, that the workings of a competitive economy will lead to lower costs. But there is another scenario which people are afraid of, and they can point to examples of costs not coming down. They can point to parts of America, in the worst example, where healthcare costs are rising, and the cost of even basic compounds such as insulin to treat diabetes, remarkably, is more expensive. There's a dysfunction in the market there. The free market can do wonders, but it can also get into failure modes. If there's too much of a monopoly, if there's a holding on to IP, if there's an information asymmetry, which is where governments sometimes need to get involved, regulating the industry. Governments have done that in the past. Famously in the US, there was a trust-busting period in which large iron companies, large steel companies, large railroad companies, oil companies were broken up by successive acts of governments to ensure some competitive field. I remember when Microsoft was proclaiming to everybody that the browser needed to be bundled tightly with the operating system, that you couldn't allow people to choose a different browser. You had to use Internet Explorer. And the judge in that case said, no, we should allow people to install alternative browsers such as Firefox or Mozilla, as it was called in these days. And thank goodness for that, because we've had a much better progress of web browsers. So governments can get involved, and sometimes they need to get involved. If we look at another technology, chemistry, if we look at the influence of CFCs, carbon fluorocarbons, I forget what they're called. Let's just call them CFCs. They were used widely in aerosols. They were used widely in refrigeration. And unexpectedly, they started accumulating in the upper atmosphere. And unexpectedly, they started to destroy the ozone layer. It took a while for this to be discovered. And by the time it was discovered and verified, there was an alarming growth in the size of the ozone layer. Why is that bad? It's because it allows more damaging rays from the sun to cause skin cancer and kill more people. And governments got involved. And big chemistry first said, we can't do anything about it. We need our rights to use these chemicals. And they disputed the science, in a bit like big tobacco disputed the science that tobacco was linked to cancer, a bit like the way big oil disputed the connection between greenhouse gases and runaway global warming. The big chemistry companies disputed. But there were some politicians who fought back, including another UK Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, who actually studied chemistry before she studied law, before she became a politician. And she and others basically said to the chemical companies, hang on, guys, this is too serious. You need to find alternatives. And there was an agreement, so-called Montreal Protocol, which basically outlawed or set a timetable for the removal of these chemicals. So that did happen. So in the same way, I think governments need to get involved. Internationally, it can start locally, but it has to have a global aspect too, to set rules for how some of these things can take place. Governments should also get involved in subsidizing some treatments, as they subsidize the cost of vaccines. In most parts of the world, people individually didn't need to pay for a COVID vaccine. That was covered by the government in an enlightened way, because if they cover the cost of the vaccine, it leads to less trauma on the healthcare system, less trauma on the economy as a whole. In the same way, governments should take the lead in ensuring that these technologies of enhancement are made available as cheaply and as quickly as possible at high quality to the whole population. Otherwise, there'll be problems with growing inequality.
Thank you. Let's switch. Well, we spoke already about longevity, living longer, and between brackets, immortality. So you wrote with Jose Cordero a great book called The Death of Death, now translated in many languages. If you had to add a chapter concerning the last 2 or 3 years, what would be the theme of it, and also what do you enjoy the most of what do you think is the most important message of this book?
So the message of the book is that things are changing. It used to be that it was pointless to think about significantly extending lifespan or even living indefinitely. That was just a nice idea, but it was not a reality. The message now is that more and more scientists have actually come together and said they might disagree about some of the best ideas for how to quickly change things, but there is a multiplicity of ideas that deserves to be investigated. I'm referring here to a webpage called DublinLongevityDeclaration.org that has the signatures of well over 100 distinguished longevity researchers from around the world, from different perspectives, but as I said, they have a consensus view that it is now the time to accelerate the application of multiple resources into some of these promising ideas, to find out which of the ideas are truly promising, to investigate possible interactions between different interventions. So if you get 2 drugs at the same time, are they going to have twice the effect or half the effect? And to accelerate across the board things like improvements in the regulatory processes, as I mentioned, improvements in the application of AI. Some of this is happening by itself because venture companies, VCs, they are investing in some startups because they think they can see relatively quickly a path to profitable returns. But many of the most promising ideas do not have a quick and easy, visible path to profit. And indeed, if there is profit, it might not come to any one company in particular. It'll be a profit for society as a whole. So VCs are less likely to invest there. That's what this declaration is asking for, in maybe not exactly these words, but it is that there should be more application of public funds from philanthropists. If there are people who have got some discretionary spending, if they're writing their wills, if they're allocating some of their successes from their own businesses or crypto earnings, more of these high net worth individuals should consider investing, supporting these philanthropic initiatives, or, of course, governments should be putting more money into this. It's an enlightened thing for them to do. So there is a growing consensus that there is an abundance of interesting research lines, including epigenetic reprogramming with the so-called Yamanaka factors, which can undo some of the damage in the epigenome, which is the parts that are attached to our DNA and which influence which genes are turned on and turned off in different cells. That ages as we get older and the various cells in our bodies start misfunctioning as a result. The treatments with these Yamanaka factors can undo some of that aging, and it seems that will have as a side effect positive impacts on other biomarkers of aging. So that's one. Treatment 2 is senolytics. Senolytics is treatments that can cause our body to be better at recycling some of the dead cells or dying cells in our body. It's a part of biology that from time to time cells go wrong, and these cells send signals to the environment and say, right, I need to be mopped up now. I need to be recycled. These are so-called senescent cells. And when we're young, the processes in our biology to deal with these senescent cells works well. But as we get older, that repair mechanism breaks down and our body gets clogged up by senescent cells. And the signals they send to the neighborhood aren't being listened to and indeed are causing more damage in that neighborhood. Well, there are a number of different approaches to senolytics, which is to accelerate the recycling of these senescent cells. That's number 2. And there's at least a dozen such initiatives which are all struggling due to lack of sufficient funding. And VCs can help in some cases. There is more VC money, more private investment in this field than ever before. It is on the way to becoming the world's largest industry, but it also needs the support of what I would call the world's largest activist community. So that's part of what this Dublin Longevity Declaration, which I've been closely involved with, is trying to do, to build an understanding that now is the time when things can be different.
Okay, to have the activist community in, among other things, to find a way to have more public money. Yeah, I like what you say. And I like what you say about venture capitalists. There are no so many possibilities to win money fast. You see quite a few of those companies who are selling products, but I think they are not working. And this is also a problem. Now let's go to your role as an executive director of the executive director of the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. So the great experiment on mice is going on. Can you explain it a bit and tell us about maybe not the last news, or maybe the last news?
So I have taken a new role recently as the executive director of LEV Foundation, that's Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. It is a foundation that was founded by Aubrey de Grey. He separated from his previous foundation, SENS, due to a disagreement about how quickly some pioneering new methods should be investigated. There was a personal breakdown there, and Aubrey decided to create this new foundation. He asked me to initially be one of the board members, and subsequently he has said he would like me to help with organization and day-to-day running of that, which I have been doing for the last few months now. It's a very important initiative, what's going on in the LEV Foundation. It's applying some of Aubrey de Grey's distinctive ideas in some potentially world-changing experiments. So the experiment you reference, Didier, refers to mice. As we said earlier, it's not inevitable that things that work in mice will transfer easily to working in humans, but there is the advantage that you can do a meaningful experiment in mice in a small number of years. So that's what this project is. It's called RMR, Robust Mouse Rejuvenation, and it takes middle-aged mice. A middle-aged mice is about 1.5 years old, and typically they might live 2.5 years. So at that stage, if nothing else happens, they would likely die within 12 months. So these mice started receiving treatments in February this year. So it hasn't been long enough yet to see any significant results. And we are telling people there are not yet any significant results. We have 1,000 mice because we want to be statistically significant. We have split these 1,000 mice into 10 groups of 100. And each of these 10 groups receives different combination of treatments. There are 4 treatments which are already known in many circumstances to extend the lifespan of middle-aged mice. And the question is, if you apply 2 or more of them in combination, do you get twice the benefit? So one of them is, I've already mentioned it, is treatment with rapamycin, which is a drug initially discovered in fungus in Easter Island, Rapa Nui, as the natives there called it. So this is a treatment that has been shown to extend the lives of middle-aged mice and is now being trialed on middle-aged dogs, as I said. There's also some genetic reprogramming with treatment to extend the telomeres of mice. That's treatment number 2. Treatment number 3 is a senolytic, which I've also touched on before. And treatment number 4 is an intervention to give the transfer of young blood cells from bone marrow. This is linked to the fascinating results that if you link together an old mouse and a young mouse, the old mouse with the shared blood circulation, these experiments are called parabiosis, they typically regain some of the characteristics of young mice. And it's not at all clear exactly what the mechanism is there. There's probably more than one mechanism. Well, we're not linking mice together. That would be a very expensive experiment, but we are transfusing some young blood cells or blood matter from young mice into old mice. So 4 types of treatment. In the 10 groups of 100 mice each, 1 of them is receiving no treatment, so they're the control. 4 of them are receiving 1 treatment each. 4 of them are receiving 3 treatments each, and 1 bunch is receiving 4 treatments. And the question is, how long will they live? And absolutely, there will be interesting statistical results from this. Hopefully, we will see some of the mice living significantly longer. Even if not, we're going to examine, and there will be work done looking at the organs, the vital processes, other characteristics of these mice. We're collecting a huge amount of data. This is an expensive project. It's cost several millions of dollars. And we want to do more. We have a long list of about 8 other treatments, which we could have done in RMR V1. We're in the process of picking a number to go into RMR V2. We're not going to wait till V1 is finished because it will take at least a year to see signs and possibly 2 years if we're lucky, because if we're lucky, we will have doubled the remaining life expectancy of these middle-aged mice by giving these treatments. Why is this significant? Let's put it in human terms. It's as if we had humans who are 50 years old, say, who hadn't received any other longevity interventions before that. If we treat humans when they're 50, normally they might expect to live maybe another 30 years. And if this plays out in the same way in humans, then instead of living another 30 years, the humans might expect to live another 60 years. And by that stage, there would be almost certainly new treatments available to extend their lives further. So this treatment's underway. It's expensive. We are now raising funds for phase 2 of this project, and there will be more news soon about this new fundraising initiative. If people already want to make a commitment to this, you can visit the levf.org. That's the website of the LEV Foundation, where there is prominently displayed a donate button, and your support will be welcome, either personally, or what you can do is you can draw the attention of wealthy people or wealthy organizations that you know and try to convince them, as I have tried to convince listeners here, that this is an important project to do, even though it's not going to have any immediate commercial returns. So don't expect to make money out of this. Instead, expect to have the possibility that you and your relatives might live a lot longer as a result of things that will follow on from these breakthrough projects.
This is really a great work, and since more than 15 years that I'm implied in discussions and research and so on concerning longevity, this is really the best project with animals. It is sad that it is the only one. You have big companies like Evolution, Altos Labs, Google Calico, who should do the same, or more precisely, who should do similar things. When Aubrey de Grey was living, since there was also a conflict with false allegation of misconduct. It is the end is at the moment very positive, and thank you also for the good news concerning the future of this.
Maybe if you want to, I guess, what would be the most crucial message or idea you hope our listeners today can take away from either your work and discussion on transhumanism and futurism in general?
The first thing I'll say is that people should be aware that there is a lot happening in longevity. It's not just what's happening at LEVF directly. So Didier was kind enough to say that perhaps this is the most important project in the world in terms of longevity, but there are other important ones too, and there's a lot going on. What SENS is doing still is useful and valuable. I'm a supporter of many of the projects at SENS. There's also the Million Molecule Project Initiative, again by Matt Kaberlein, and his view is that we've discovered almost by accident that various molecules extend life. I mentioned this Rapa Nui found at Rapa Nui, Easter Island, which has been applied. It was an accident. There could be many other accidental discoveries. So Matt Kaberlein has developed a system which can much more quickly apply molecules to, not to mice, this time it's to C. elegans worms, and to see whether this makes them live longer. And he has automated it. He has got cameras watching these C. elegans worms and detecting how long they live without humans needing to be involved. So again, this is the application of technology. So he has already found some combinations. If you give metformin plus some other compound, the C. elegans worms live longer than if you just give metformin. So these are encouraging results. There's a lot going on. Now, to answer your question more directly, Gaetan, what are my messages? To succeed in this world, we're going to need three things to steer the world possibly. We're going to need philosophy, education, and politics, or better philosophy, better education, and better politics. And that will allow us to get full advantage of the technology that's within our grasp. The philosophy is transhumanism. The philosophy says that we should not look to try and solve our problems with the human nature remaining the same as today. If we leave human nature the same as it is, we're going to get worse politics. We're going to get all kinds of divisiveness. We have to improve human nature, and we can improve human nature. So equally important as rejuvenating our bodies is rejuvenating our minds. It's finding ways that we have these intelligent assistants that guide us not just to be cleverer, but guide us to be better all round, more emotionally intelligent, more collaborative. That's a very important piece of work. And the philosophy behind it is that the solution for humanity is better in all aspects than the human nature we have inherited. And we should not try and just make do with the lifespans and with the levels of stupidity and the levels of backbiting, deceptive politics we got now. We can transcend all of that. That's the vision, and we have to make it credible. Making it credible involves the second thing I mentioned, education, which brings me back to the Vital Syllabus project. It's one of many educational initiatives. Part of what LEVF is doing is trying to educate people that things are changing with longevity. We're also trying to answer what we call the longevity myths. That's the things that people tell themselves to excuse themselves from not getting involved in longevity projects. Oh, aging is inevitable. Oh, if it is cured, it's going to lead to overpopulation. Oh, if it is cured, it's just going to be the rich people who are going to benefit. And all of these longevity myths can all be punctured and answered, and education is part of that too. But third, there's politics, and I mean small p politics and large p politics. I mean learning how to cooperate better, learning how to build large projects and work together with people we might not particularly like. That's small p politics. We have to be better at that because the intelligence we get is magnified if we get it right with collaborative intelligence. Often the people who have different philosophies from us still have valuable insights, which is why I don't want to go to war with the techno-libertarian side of transhumanism. I want to learn from their important insights, and they likewise should be learning from the insights from the techno-progressive field. So that's small p politics. Large p politics is we've got to change what the prime ministers and presidents and secretaries of state have on their minds. They have to see the bigger vision. They have to be informed, and we have to improve them too by using technology that won't be generating more fakes, technology on the contrary that will be helping people to see through fakes. When politicians make boastful claims that aren't true, in real time the system should be flagging that up. A bit like when I type and I have a misspelling, the system puts red wiggly lines underneath it. Consider changing the spelling of this word. Consider changing the grammar. In the similar way, we need real-time, reliable fact checkers saying, don't believe this video. This video did not come out of Gaza last week. It came from a conflict in Syria 10 years ago, and so on. We need a much better quality of AI to improve our political discussion and elevate. In due course, I see AI doing something like in the UK, we've got the House of Lords, which is the upper chamber. It's the more elderly, more senior part of the political system that offers advice and sometimes tries to revise the legislation made in the House of Commons. Well, in the future, fairly soon, I think we can have a House of AI in which AI is reviewing our potential new political initiatives or new legislation, and offering us friendly advice which will make us wiser. So the transformation of philosophy, the transformation of education, and the transformation of politics. These are the three essential, vital projects of the next few years.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for your participation to this conversation. That was very interesting, fascinating, even. And I encourage every listener to check also your podcast, the London Futurist podcast, which I'm a big fan. So yeah, I will put all the links in the description of this podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.